Here we are back to Mr. Tucket by Gary Paulson. We're at chapter 12. For a week they rode at an easy pace, saving the horses. Still, they made close to 100 miles before Mr. Grimes pulled up on the seventh evening. "How do you feel about a little night riding, Mr. Tucket?" he asked. "All right," Francis answered. "Why?" "I sort of figured we could make Spot Johnny's before turning in. Be nice to have a decent meal and sleep loose for a change." Francis had no idea what he was talking about. Not once had he mentioned this Spot Johnny, but Francis decided not to question the mountain man. "And we can grain the horses, especially that mare of yours." So they rode on. There was half a moon to furnish some light, and some time toward midnight Mr. Grimes pointed down at a light in a shallow valley. "Spot Johnny's," he said. "Now, when we go in, you stay right out to the side of me so it doesn't look like you're sneaking, okay?" Francis nodded. They started down, angled across a flat meadow, and approached 3 log buildings. When they were still 100 feet from the cabins, Mr. Grimes stopped. "Ease that hammer down with your thumb, Spot," he said in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. "It's Jason Grimes." Francis hadn't seen or heard a thing, so it was to his utter and complete surprise that the figure of a man arose suddenly beside him, not 5 feet away. He jumped. "Dang it all, Jason," the man said, laughing and shaking his head. "You sure do ruin a man's fun. I was planning to let you get all the way up to the building and then take that pretty hat of yours off, feather and all." "That's why I stopped," Mr. Grimes answered. "Got me a friend here who doesn't understand that kind of fun. He might just put a ball in your gizzard by mistake." Rather than stop to talk, they kept on riding slowly, and Spot Johnny walked between them. They pulled up at the front cabin. Light was leaking out around the hide windows, and in its glow, Francis got his first look at Spot Johnny as Mr. Grimes introduced them. There wasn't really much to see. He could have been 50 or 100. He had a gray beard and long hair that hung well past his shoulders, and he wore beaded buckskins. There was no hat on his head. Instead, he wore a beaded headband to keep his hair out of his eyes. His rifle was a Hawkins. Francis liked him at once. There was a nice sound in his speech and sort of easy confidence, and his eyes looked merry all the time. "Figure you were always pretty much of a loner, Jason," Spot said, eyeing Francis. "How'd you come by picking up a cub?" While Mr. Grimes explained about Francis, a boy of perhaps 10 years of age came out of the cabin and took the horses around back. Then the 3 of them went inside. At first, the inside of the cabin made Francis homesick. It was all so warm and cheerful. 2 children were playing on the floor beneath a huge wooden table. There was a fire in the fireplace, although it wasn't at all cold. On one side of the cabin, there were beds arranged in bunk fashion, and all around the walls hung blankets and jackets and old moccasins. It looked like a home. And then suddenly, he wasn't so homesick anymore. Leaning over a big kettle near the fireplace was a large Indian woman. It startled him to see the woman, not in a lodge, but in a house. She must be Johnny's wife, he knew, but he caught himself staring just the same. She made him think of the Pawnee village. As if reading his mind, Spot Johnny suddenly spoke up. "And this is my family, Mr. Tucket. That's my wife, Bird Dance, over by the fire, and under the table are Jared and John, and the boy you saw outside was Clarence." The boys under the table didn't look up, but Bird Dance turned from the fire, smiled, and said in perfect English, "How do you do? I'm sure you must be hungry after riding all day. Please sit down and have some stew and biscuits." Francis managed to hide his surprise. Just remember, never judge a book by its cover. Francis managed to hide his surprise. He smiled. He liked her at once and turned to the table. Mr. Grimes was already sitting there with Spot. "How have you been making out, Spot?" Mr. Grimes asked. "Fit," came the answer. "Pure fit and prime. Got me a full warehouse of furs and a wagon or 2 due next week from St. Louis to pick 'em up. Been a good year, and it might be a better one next. And you?" So, Mr. Grimes answered. "Found me a new hole last winter that I figure I'm trying before snow comes." "What are you giving for near prime pelts this year, Spot?" "You mean in money or trade?" "Money." $2 if it's a big one." "Seems kind of low." "I might go 3 if I knew the trapper and knew he wasn't out just to give me his coals." "Fair enough. You got yourself a deal. Now, about provisions. You got everything? All but sugar. It's running $3 a pint, wholesale, so I put off ordering it, hoping it would go down a mite. Fine, we'll need the usual. Your oldest boy can put it together tomorrow. In the meantime, I've got some questions that need answering. They had to stop talking to eat the stew and biscuits, which proved to be worth at least a 10-day ride. Francis ate 4 bowls of stew. He must have been starved. And half a dozen fresh biscuits before Bird Dance cleared the table. Now, Spot said, lighting a pipe and propping his legs on a small 3-legged stool. What kind of questions you got, Jason? About Indians, Spot. There's something downright funny going on, and I can't pin it down. Take Braid, for instance. You take him, Spot cut in. I've had enough of that skunk to hold me for all my days. What happened? Nothing, to me. But Braid's been thinking of taking over the whole Pawnee Nation, way it looks, and for nothing but war. He was here a while back asking for things, powder mostly, and caps. Only he didn't ask for them in the way a man might. He said, the Pawnee want powder, and the Pawnee want caps, just like he was talking for the whole tribe. I don't like it. I thought he was getting a little feisty, Mr. Grimes said. It's not just things like taking this boy, Spot said, gesturing toward Francis. That's bad enough, but Braid's also been raiding. There have been 2 wagon trains through here, and they both lost some people up to Pawnees, being led by Braid. Those 2 trains, Francis said, interrupting. Did any of the people in them mention losing a little girl? Spot scratched his head. No, mostly they didn't want to talk about those they'd lost, so they didn't talk about the Indians much at all. One woman, I think it was a brown-haired woman, asked me if the Indians always killed captives. She was pretty broken up about losing a boy. I'm that boy, Francis said. She's my mother, he sighed. Then at least his mother was alive, and most likely his father. She didn't mention a girl named Rebecca. Nope, at least not that I recollect, but as I said, the people mostly didn't talk about the raid. They were silent for a while, thinking Francis was imagining the muscled figure of Braid nestled just over his rifle's sights. Braid's stupid, Spot continued after a minute or two. He's talking about making a clean sweep or so, I hear, and driving all whites from Pawnee territory. That's a bit strong, Mr. Grimes said. He might hit a train or 2, but I don't think he'll bother us. I mean, you and me. It would only hurt him to put us under. He'd get no more trade. All the same, Spot said, if I were you, and I knew Braid was around somewhere, I'd make sure I had my shoulder blades covered by a tree. Mr. Grimes shrugged. I do that anyway, just natural. But I don't like this other thing much. If there's anything worse than 1 mad Pawnee, it's 100 mad Pawnees. Braid stirring up a war, maybe. Not so good. His voice trailed off, and that finished any talk for another 30 minutes or so while they ate and drank still more. Francis had thought he was full, but he was fast changing his eating patterns. He was learning that when you can eat, you eat. It might be a couple of days before you get a chance to eat again. Just one question, Mr. Grimes said around a mouthful of biscuit. What's the story on the crows? I spent a week coming across their stomping grounds and didn't see a one. Usually I get shot at least once. I don't know, Spot answered. But there's been word they found a big herd of buffalo and spent the summer living in back of the herd. I also heard they've broken up a bit, too many war chiefs or something, and that there's a bunch of small bands out just taking what they can get when they can get it. But you know the crows. If you see 'em more than likely you're going to have to fight 'em. Spot leaned back and sighed. Enough of that. I think it's time for a game. Or are you scared? I figured you'd probably give it up, seeing how bad I whipped you last time. Whip me, snorted Mr. Grimes. Did you hear that, Mr. Tucket? This old spot-head thinks he whipped me. Why, drag out the plank and we'll see who whips who in this pond. Stakes? Spot asked, laughing. 1 prime belt, which I haven't got, against 3 pints of sugar, which you haven't got. Suit you? Why not? I can always use another pelt. Oh, you sure are the one for talk. Where's that plank? Spot turned and fetched a flat board from the wall. The board was about 2 feet long, and at either end a heavy leather thong was lashed. Francis could make neither head nor tail of it. even when Spot put the board down in front of Mr. Grimes and seated himself opposite. The children had been put to bed, but Spot's wife came over from a stool by the fire. She was smiling and kept smiling while she took their right arms and placed them on the board. When the arms were in such a position that the back of Mr. Grimes' hand was against the back of Spot's, she brought the leather thongs up and around and lashed their elbows in place. Now their arms could move neither forward nor backward nor up at the elbow. The two men with their hands still back to back. Hooked thumbs. Mr. Grimes looked at Spot. Spot returned the look. They both nodded, and the woman said, "Go." It didn't seem to be much of a match at first. The object of the contest was to twist your arm and drag your opponent's thumb down to the board by twisting his arm. At the start, Spot got the jump. Mr. Grimes didn't stop him until his thumb was almost smashed into the board, and then only by an effort that made all the cords in his neck stand out. They hung like that for a long time, grinning at each other, their breath coming in rasp. Then, ever so slowly, Mr. Grimes started to push Spot's thumb back up. The thumb stopped again when they were straight up, swung back and forth for a period of 10 seconds, and suddenly plunged down until Spot's thumb touched the board. "Ah," he said, "where'd you get all that?" "Been practicing," Mr. Grimes answered, "figuring the way you whipped me last time." "Ha! Woman," Spot called, "fetch this badger 3 pints of brown sugar. Not that he earned it. Understand, but a deal is a deal." "Seems there's a snake around here somewhere," Mr. Grimes said, grinning. "I thought you didn't have any sugar." "Nope," said, "I didn't order any." "Lots of difference. Besides, you trying to tell me that you don't have a single pelt out there in your pack somewheres?" "Nope. Got 3 I saved from last year." Francis stared at them. The betting didn't make any sense. They both bet something they said they didn't have, but that they really did have. He was going to ask about it, but just then Mr. Grimes suggested getting some sleep, and Francis, who had been sitting by with the fire glow with the warm glow of the fire on his back and an extremely full stomach, realized that if he so much as blinked, he'd be asleep. He staggered to the warm corner by the fire, where Spot told him to go, and was soon dead to the world. That was chapter 12 of Mr. Tucket. See you later. Bye.